Stacy.
Kim.
What's going well today for you?
Everything so far.
Any nice plans for the weekend?
Yes. I'm taking a class on yoga teacher training. So
Nice.
I do that Saturdays and Sundays. And today I'm getting a pedicure.
Oh, I haven't had a pedicure in about a year.
Yeah.
Well, good for you.
Yeah, I only get them in the summer.
Yeah, because the rest of the time the toes are covered with shoes and
Yeah.
boots. Yes.
Always.
So thanks for coming back to the show.
Sure.
Today we're going to talk about personality disorders. And I personally have had lots of therapy around this because I've been the recipient of love bombing, manipulation, gaslighting, the silent treatment, and all the things. And I'm so glad you're here to talk about this. So my first question is, what is a personality disorder? And is there more than one kind? And what are the common traits of a person who has these disorders?
Okay. So a personality disorder is different from a mental health issue. If you were to go to a psychiatrist, in their notes, they're not going to show this to you, but they diagnose you and they have 5 what they call axes. The first axis is whatever you're there for, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, whatever you're getting help for. I'm going to skip axis 2. Axis 3 is whatever health issues you might be dealing with, like diabetes or obesity. Axis 4 is your stressors, academic, family, whatever they are. Some people put mild, moderate, or severe. And then axis 5 is basically a number of functioning for insurance companies mostly. Axis 2 is where the provider will put things that will never go away. So a simple example of that would be developmental disability. Like that is never going to be cured. It can be managed. And there are strategies that you can put in place to make it easier or harder, but it's never going to go away. And personality disorders live there. So these are things about people that will never be cured, only managed. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So far?
Yes.
Okay. So like you can get help for depression, you can get help for anxiety, you can get help for personality disorder, and in a minute, I'll talk about which ones do, but it's really more about managing yourself or managing a loved one rather than fixing it. There are actually 3 subsets of personality disorders. We're going to talk about one particular one today because it's the one we see out in the world the most. They call them clusters. So there's a cluster A, a cluster B, and a cluster C. And A is kind of the weirder ones where you have more schizophrenic type traits, not schizophrenia, but paranoia and delusions. And so those people tend to not be functional enough to be out in society. So we don't see that very much outside of hospitals. And cluster C is anxious and avoidant people who are really, really afraid of interaction. So we also don't see them very much out in the world because they're hiding. Cluster B, those are the ones we run into. So those are the ones I'd like to talk about, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
There are 4. One is narcissistic personality disorder. Second one is antisocial personality disorder. Probably the most common one is number 3, borderline personality disorder, which is not what it actually sounds like. And then the last one is histrionic personality disorder. And in general, these people walk around in the world and we run into them. So it's kind of important to be able to recognize when this is present, because the primary thing that ties these together is they do not relate to other people normally. They do not relate to other people as people. They see people more as tools to get what they want, or to get their own needs met. Some say they can't really love in the way that most of us do. I don't know if that's, I think they can love, but it's not the same as the rest of us. It's kind of more of a imitation. They learn by rote, and they learn by watching others, and they can tailor their behavior to look like whatever it needs to look like, but it's not real. It doesn't go all the way down deep. So part of the problem of that is they often are very charismatic, very smart, very well practiced, great social skills. So they're very likable, and that's kind of how you get drawn in and end up in relationships with them. And it's not until a ways down the road that you start to have the things that you're talking about: manipulation, gaslighting, silent treatment. And then most of us are like, what did I do? What's wrong with me?
Right.
Why is this happening? And really, it has absolutely nothing to do with you. And these patterns follow these people throughout their lives. They are incapable of healthy relationships.
So sad.
It is. And most of them don't seek therapy or help. The people that seek therapy and help are friends and family. Oftentimes, there are a lot of support groups for friends and family, because if you have, for example, a narcissistic mother, that's going to open up a whole can of worms if you're raised by someone like that and you can't get away from it. Or if you have a child with a personality disorder, you can't necessarily just shove them away. You have to learn how to manage it. So there are lots of online support groups and in-person support groups. Do you want to go through the 4 different kinds and kind of look at how they're different?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Okay. We've heard a lot about narcissism in the last 5 or 10 years. There's a difference between how we colloquially use the word narcissistic. People can appear narcissistic without having a personality disorder. So the classic example of this would be someone who is has like low self-esteem and then tries to overcompensate by bragging or talking about how great they are, but really they don't believe that. It's coming from a place of self-loathing more than anything else.
Yeah,
and
you know what? I heard recently, there's a new term called conversational narcissist. And it's someone who hijacks a conversation to talk about themselves nonstop.
Yes.
So that's kind of what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So they're not really, I mean, they can be a narcissist, but they don't have to be. They just have narcissistic traits, maybe.
Yes.
Is that what?
Exactly. Narcissistic traits that are actually covering up insecurity is what that is. And those people aren't actual narcissists. They just act like play one on TV. They act like it. It's covering up insecurity, and I think we all can relate to that. True narcissists actually believe they are better than everyone else in the human race. Like they actually, all the way down to their core, believe that they're more talented, smarter, exceptional, and that no one else is as good as they are.
I think you just described me. I'm just kidding. Sorry.
No, that's not you. I know you. There's another, just to mention, sociologists do studies of like narcissism, like in our society. The generation of kiddos that are coming up now, so I would say 25 and under, have a higher narcissistic scale than older people. Actually, millennials had a higher scale, and now Gen Z has a higher scale. So all that means is, in general, the norm is to be more narcissistic than not. And the primary reason for that is social media, because they want to put their lives out there, and they're used to getting a lot of adoration and comments So a lot of their self-worth comes from outside, which I think is pretty sad. But that doesn't mean they're all narcissists. It means that they look at narcissism in a lot of different ways now, because of that. So the challenge with a narcissist is it's very hard to see in the beginning. They tend to come on very strong, really they're just lovely people. They're really nice to you and they compliment you. It's almost like they're playing a part in a play of the great guy. The ratio of narcissists, men to women, it's 5-1. Men are 5 times more likely to be a narcissist than women. But they have this pattern of self-importance and a deep need to get compliments and admiration. They are entitled and they lack empathy. And that the lack of empathy is the primary thing that runs through all 4 of these personality types. They can act empathetic, appear empathetic, but it's not real. Being married to a narcissist is extremely difficult. Not uncommon because they're so charming and fun. But once you get deep into it and they have you, they own you. It's very hard to set boundaries. It's very easy to lose yourself in the relationship because they're just so insistent on their own way and they don't have empathy. So it really doesn't matter if you're happy or not, as long as you're playing the part in their play that they want you to play.
Yeah, that's a tough situation.
And you would think, since they don't really deeply care, it would be easy to get away from them, but they consider you a belonging. So oftentimes trying to divorce or separate from a narcissist is extremely difficult. The worst divorces that I've seen and worked with through the children that I work with parental things are one of the parents is a narcissist and just wants the kids because they're theirs, without any concern for the hurt that they may be causing. So it's pretty ugly.
Yeah. So are people born with personality disorders or are they developed over time?
Both. They think they're not 100% sure. I mean, there's inconsistent research. They think it's a combination of how you're wired and upbringing. And these people are usually pretty successful. If you think about it, if you don't care about anybody else, you'll do whatever you need to do to get what you want. You tend to rise pretty high in your career because you don't mind lying, you don't mind manipulating, you don't feel bad if you just step on somebody's toes, you take credit for other people's work. And in a relationship, like you said, gaslighting, they make you feel like you're the crazy one.
Exactly.
Calm and it shows up differently depending on what kind of relationship you're in. If it's a spouse, I talked a little bit about that. It's very controlling, sometimes abusive, and very difficult to get away from. Having a narcissistic parent is also extremely damaging. One of the books that I recommended is all about it's for adults who grew up with a parent with narcissism, and it breaks it down like in different types of narcissistic parents and the effects that can have when people as adults that were raised that way. It's pretty
sometimes they are, it's called the golden child, right?
Yeah, well, they'll exaggerate your successes because they actually belong to them. So that's the type. There's 4 subsets, and one of them is the grandiose narcissistic parent, where everything is perfect and they push their children to ridiculous lengths to be exceptional and be the golden child. And often what that does is it has the opposite effect when that child becomes an adult. They never feel good enough.
Oh, yeah.
Because the bar has always been set so high. Another type is called the needy narcissist. And that's a mom or a dad who makes it all about themselves. Like your children are there to serve you and to make you feel loved.
Yeah. It's the kid's responsibility.
Right.
Yeah.
It's actually pretty sad because this comes from a lack of any real self-esteem. So they actually feel very empty inside, and they don't have a sense of identity outside of what the world tells them. So if you think about it, if you don't have a sense of identity, the only place you can get it is from other people and your situation. So that becomes extremely important, not the actual relationship, but what you're getting out of the relationship and what the world sees in you. So they're actually very sad people. They'd never admit that. And they do not ever seek therapy because there's nothing wrong with them. Yeah. I actually had, in my 30 years of doing therapy, I had one gentleman come in and he said to me, and this is a direct quote, "I don't need you to fix me. I need you to fix everybody around me." Oh. I was like, can't. Sorry. Not in my power. He really meant that. Like, he really believed that there was something wrong with the people, all of the people that were around him, because they weren't buying into his belief system about himself.
So did he suffer from borderline?
No.
Personality disorder?
No, he was just a narcissistic guy whose wife probably forced him to come to therapy. He only came once. When I told him I couldn't change the world, he kind of didn't see a need. And one that is closely linked to that, also more prevalent in men, is antisocial personality. And that affects, they're not sure, 2 to 4% of the population, which, if you think about it, that's kind of a lot. 2 out of 4 every 100 people is antisocial. They also are narcissistic in that they think nothing's wrong with them. They're more dangerous, though, because they are a lot more abusive. Of course, when we think antisocial, we think sociopath, we think serial killers, right? That's a super extreme. Yes, serial killers have antisocial personality disorder, but only 7% of people with this disorder ever commit a crime at all. And it would be a minuscule amount that actually are serial killers. It's just more, they're hostile, they're angry, they have irritability, it's poor impulse control, complete disregard for the safety of other people. Someone that drives 150 miles an hour on the freeway, that's antisocial behavior. Doesn't mean they necessarily have a personality disorder, but a pattern of doing things like that with no regard for other people. With narcissists, they just care about like themselves. Antisocial people are almost angrily fighting with the world for themselves, if that makes sense. They also have no empathy and no remorse. No matter what happens, no remorse. They don't even know what that feels like.
So do any of these people ever really reach out for help? Or is it the family members or the friends who are the ones that are reaching out for the help?
Always family members and friends. These two, both narcissistic and antisocial people, think they're fine.
Right. So how would they ever, like, when you go to a therapist, you tell them all the things that are happening, and they say, well, I can't diagnose them because I haven't seen them. But then do they really see them? Do you really see the people who are causing these issues? Do they ever go in and actually get diagnosed? Because they don't think they have a problem, so why go?
Not on purpose.
Yeah. Accidentally.
With antisocial, a lot of times they end up in trouble, so they're in the system, like they're adjudicated to go. Okay. Usually as a juvenile. They don't ever diagnose this until the age of 18, but there are signs of it much earlier. So usually for them, they end up being like required to do therapy in order to not go to prison.
Right. That makes sense.
They go to prison and come out and have to do a certain amount of therapy. It's not real. They're not getting anything out of it. They're just doing it because it's required. The other situation would be if a wife is seeing a therapist and then pulls her husband in, and they decide to just kind of cooperate with that because it's the path of least resistance.
Yeah, because I was wondering, how do any of these narcissists get diagnosed as narcissists? Because they don't think there's something wrong.
No.
So they don't, so they're not going to walk in and go, I think I have a personality disorder. I think I'm narcissistic. Can you please sit with me and tell me what's wrong with me and diagnose me? I mean, they're not going to do that.
They get diagnosed adjacently, usually by someone else that's coming in and saying, here's what's happening in this relationship. And then the therapist can usually, with enough information, say, I think you're dealing with a narcissist. And you can't officially diagnose someone you don't see.
Right.
You don't need an official diagnosis to recognize a true narcissist. It's pretty apparent. And it's almost always a spouse that will come in. Children never come in and identify narcissistic traits, but adults will certainly come in and talk about their mom and their history. And then a therapist may assume adjacently, I think your mom is probably a narcissist.
Yeah.
And that helps just figuring out where some of the problems that adult child is having. It makes more sense, and it takes it kind of off of them. There's nothing wrong with them. They were just brought up in this toxic environment. And then you can really work with them. There's a lot of hope there, and there's a lot of resources there for that.
Yeah. Let's talk about red flags. Let's talk a little more about that, the red flags and what signs people should look for.
One thing that I usually recommend, if somebody comes on super strong and like just overwhelms you, like love bombing, you've heard that phrase, just all over you, acting like you're the best thing ever. I mean, we all want that, right? It's intoxicating.
Makes us feel special.
Yes. So that's how they suck you in. So I always recommend, if somebody just love bombs you and pours all their attention into you, it's not necessarily, narcissist, but it is something to keep in the back of your mind, because it's possible. The way they talk about themselves, if you listen carefully to the words, a lot of people brag, but there's a different tone to it. It's almost like, well, of course I can do that. Of course I'm the only one that can solve that problem. No one else knows as much as me about that. Like, even if it's completely outlandish, like if I said, I could do neurosurgery, I'm sure. I can't, but I believe I can. So really listening for that, trying to differentiate, is this some guy just trying to be macho and show off, or is this guy actually believe he can do neurosurgery?
Yeah. What about like people who name drop constantly?
Also.
Always important people that they're name dropping.
And again, it's kind of hard to draw that line between, is this person super insecure and name dropping just so that I'm impressed with him?
Right.
Or is this person name dropping because he actually believes he's that important, and he's in his mind just magnified the relationship between these famous people? He may have walked by him once in the street. No, Matt Damon and I are buds. Are you? And it always turns controlling. And that's the point where you have to leave. Controlling behavior always leads to more controlling behavior. And that's always, in a romantic relationship, a sign that is a huge red flag. And teenage girls tend to fall into this. Well, he doesn't want me to wear certain things. Like, you can wear whatever you want.
Right.
Like, and it's okay for him to be like, I don't like you in that, or I don't want you to wear something that's skimpy, but you're not allowed to wear that. That's a boundary cross. Like, someone who's jumping into your space and telling you how to live, how to do your hair, don't talk at the party, you embarrass me. I would make me talk more personally.
Right.
But so people who tend to have weaker self-esteems and self-worth tend to fall very easily victim into this, because they're love bombed, so they feel intoxicatingly cherished. So then when these intermittent controlling behaviors appear, they tend to make excuses for it or even believe it. Oh, I'm embarrassing at parties, so I should just be quiet. And before you know it, she's changed her whole behavior and her whole self to fit with this person. And you're usually too deep in before you're like, this isn't normal.
Yeah.
So a lot of times when they seek therapy, they're seeking therapy, something's wrong with me.
Yes.
And then through discussion, it's like, nothing's wrong with you other than you fell into this trap of this narcissistic person who doesn't actually care about you.
Right.
You are a reflection of him.
Yeah.
So if he criticizes your appearance, it's because you are arm candy to him and nothing more.
So what happens if let's say you're on to them and you want to get away? Whether it's a friend, a family member, a spouse, what do you do if you want to get away? And should you tell them that you're on to them?
The difference between these two personality disorders and the next two that we haven't talked about yet is when you're on to them, you have to get away.
Yeah.
You can't just set boundaries and say, okay, well, I'll be able to work this relationship out if I just set some clear boundaries. They will jump across them and they will hurt you over and over and over. And the more resistant you get to that, the more they try to hurt you because it's a power thing, right? So the healthier you get by therapy or just self-realization or being onto them, the meaner they'll get and the more desperate they'll get. And then the more extreme their behaviors will be. Really, you just need to extricate yourself from that relationship completely. And if it's a friend, just, I can't be friends with you anymore. This relationship is not healthy for me, and block. And that's, you're done. And
then learn about boundaries if you don't know about boundaries. Can you describe what a boundary is?
Sure. Let me talk about the other two because
please do.
Super important with them because so probably the most common that we see, absolutely the most common we see in therapy is a borderline personality disorder, BPD. That tends to be more common in women, though it does appear in men as well, but a lot more often in women. And I like to describe this. If you think about a 13-year-old girl and all of the things that 13-year-old girls do, they manipulate and they talk about people behind their back and they're dramatic and they say they're going to kill themselves and they are best friends with somebody one day and hate them the next. Put that in a 40-year-old woman. And that's somebody with borderline personality. So, primary symptoms, long history of unstable relationships. There's nobody they've been friends with for more than a brief period of time. So they're not going to have any childhood friends that they still keep in touch with. A lot of manipulation and triangulation, which is a form of manipulation where I tell you one thing and I tell her something else. And then I watch the conflict that I have created. I just sit back and watch what happens. That's super fun. The other thing that is unique to them is we call it worship devaluation, where they absolutely love you. They worship you. They cling to you. You're the best friend they've ever had. You're the only person that understands them. And you say one thing wrong, they hate you. Absolute hatred. And this isn't just somebody that has big mood swings where they're back and forth. They actually hate you. It's not just they're acting like they hate you because they're angry. They don't feel anything for you anymore. Switch, turns on, turns off.
Yeah.
There's a book called I Hate You, Don't Leave Me, which is almost the statement that embodies borderline behavior. The back and forth of, and you can imagine what being in a relationship with someone who is your best friend one day and then the next day does something awful to hurt you. And then the next day they love you again. They're very sad inside, a lot of drama, a lot of almost always suicidal ideation. And what's really sad is 10% of them will successfully kill themselves in their life.
What about the silent treatment?
The silent treatment. So everybody, no matter what personality disorder and cluster B that you have, you will use the same strategies to control people. So whether you're a narcissist, whether you're antisocial, whether you're borderline, you will use the silent treatment to prove how, either to control someone or to prove how much you hate them.
Or as a punishment type of
As
thing?
a punishment. Yeah. Borderline people are constantly punishing people for stepping out of line from their own idea of what this friendship should be. And again, there's a lack of empathy. It's all about me. You are here to fulfill my needs. And it never even occurs to me that you may actually be a person with needs of your own. These people you can continue a relationship with. You just have to be super, super clear about boundaries. And the fourth one, histrionic. It's not diagnosed that much because usually if you're histrionic, you're often also borderline. And that's kind of the reason these are clustered together, is because you can have kind of a mix of symptoms. And they just sometimes will say cluster B, like you lack empathy, you have poor boundaries, you don't have stable relationships, and you're all about yourself, whether that's because you're narcissistic or because you are borderline. Borderline people are almost the opposite of narcissists inside, and they act opposite. They get very clingy, where narcissists wouldn't get clingy. They would just like punish you.
Interesting. And then histrionic, what's the difference between?
Histrionic is about drama. So people with histrionic personalities tend to be super dramatic, super over the top. I need approval from others all the time. So I'm constantly asking you, do I look okay? Do I look okay? Are you sure I look okay? Really obsessed with what they're putting out. Again, same core issue, right? I'm empty inside. So I need to get all of my data about who I am from the external world. And if you're histrionic, you're probably also borderline. So borderline is usually the diagnosis that ends up, because it's a bigger, heavier diagnosis. And there's a lot more research on how to treat borderline personality. There's an entire section of therapy that was actually created at the University of Washington for borderline personality. And it's fabulously successful.
Really?
Yeah. And it does. So it works on 3 areas. It works on social skills. So just teaching them how to act, not necessarily understand why they should act that way, but this is how you relate to people. So just basic social skills, because they don't always have them. And then the other one is distress tolerance. So when you're upset, being able to push through it and not fall apart into a puddle of goo because you didn't get your way or because someone said something maybe that you didn't like. And then emotional regulation, being able to calibrate your emotion to the situation. And again, if you think of a young teenage girl, those are the things that you have to work on with them too. So they've been able to expand this therapy to adolescence, because it's really just dealing with symptoms, because it's not going to be cured. It's going to be managed. If you have a friend or a sister or a family member with borderline personality, boundaries are the primary thing that's either going to make or break your relationship. Boundaries are healthy for all of us, first of all. We all need that. Almost all relationship issues, personality disorder, just regular people, usually come down to boundary problems.
Yeah.
So setting really firm boundaries and holding them. The difficulty is if someone's got a personality disorder and they don't actually care about you for real, they're going to try to jump your boundaries.
Right. They don't respect your boundaries.
Yeah. Whereas most of us try to respect boundaries that our people we care about set. We don't always, succeed, but we at least understand and try and can work through it. It's fascinating working with borderline people because the less you play into the drama, the bigger the drama gets until it goes away because it's not working. So you'd think if someone is screaming and crying and banging their head on the wall, your natural instinct would be to comfort them.
Of course.
Yeah, no. You just wait. Just wait.
Oh, that's tough.
Yeah, it is. Because if you say, oh, are you okay? Do you want to talk? What's the matter? Poor baby. You're just feeding it.
Right.
Literally feeding it. Because
they're getting more attention that way, right?
Right. And they'll do crazy things to get that need met. And usually we run into this in friendships where, somebody's really nice and like really wants to be your friend and is paying a lot of attention to you. And all of a sudden they start acting kind of weird and they start having all these problems and they need all this help and you're their friend. So your natural inclination is to try and help and be there. And you start to get exhausted by it. The phrase that we use a lot is they use people up. So a friend will come into their life and it'll be okay for a while. But at some point, that friend becomes exhausted by the needs and the manipulation, the lying that often happens with it. And then also being worshipped one minute and hated the next, and then worshipped again. It's like, what is happening?
And I heard the term supply, like we are their supply, and then that starts to fade away. And so they find some other supply, right?
They don't have any supply on their own.
Right.
So they're sucking it from the people around them. And the people around them will, depending on their personality, they will take it as long as they can, but they tend to eventually get abandoned, which is their big fear. So it comes from a fear of there's nothing in here. People are always going to abandon me. And then they make that actually come true by pushing and pushing and pushing and sucking and sucking and sucking. And then they're abandoned. And then they can say, see, the world is evil.
Right.
And then they grab another person because they also are usually very charming and friendly and nice and very extroverted because they want to relate to suck more people in for supply. So
and are they generally attracted to kind people who are fun and nice and
sure.
Yeah.
And so there's two things that attract them. One is that, and it's almost like they have a sense of this is somebody who's going to be nice to me. This is just somebody who's just nice to everyone. So if you are that kind of person where you're just friendly and pleasant and just if you're a person that kind of likes just about everybody you meet, that's the kind of people they target. Also, if you are a passive person who just likes to please, like a people pleaser, because this person comes into your life and they're really interesting and fun, and then they have a problem, so you run over to help them. And then they kind of jump your boundary, but you don't want to fight because they're upset. So you end up pleasing and pleasing and pleasing. And instead of them recognizing that or trying to make a balance, they'll just suck and suck and suck until you're exhausted. And then you may try to set a boundary and they'll jump right over it.
Right.
So then you're in this like, this person is exhausting me. I can't take it. But for people pleasers, it's very hard to leave a relationship because we always feel like if I try a little harder, And what's kind of interesting is adults that are raised by narcissistic mothers tend to become easy prey for people with borderline personality and narcissism as well, because we will put up with a lot more because we are always trying to make them happy. Because you didn't grow up with really strong boundaries and a healthy set of rules and a healthy, unconditional, loving relationship with your parents, kind of vulnerable.
Well, you I would think you seek it out. You seek out that love that you didn't get.
The love bombing, right? It's really appealing if you kind of grew up without it or grew up with a weird version of it. So, and you don't walk away from relationships easily because you crave them. So you tend to stay long after the fair is over. Like people tend to stick with a borderline personality a lot longer than is reasonable.
Right.
So boundaries. There are two kinds of boundaries. There are protective boundaries and containment boundaries. A protective boundaries is the thing that you put up to protect yourself from the world. So I'm not going to go to yoga and talk about super personal information in front of people who don't really know. Because, duh, I'm going to protect myself. If someone is mean to me, I'm going to stand up for myself and say no. It's the wall that you put between you and the world. And we all have to have one. Some of us have a really thick protective boundary where we don't let anybody in. And some of us have protective boundary that's like a plastic baggie where people can just poke through all the time.
Or some people have no boundaries where they give all their information away.
And all their love and all their...
Yeah.
Make themselves completely vulnerable right away before they can gauge how safe a situation is. And again, people that grow up with narcissistic parents tend to have a very difficult time with boundaries. It either goes to one extreme or another. Either you have 3 feet walls between you and the world and you can't really form relationships where you trust, or you crave love so badly that you just slurp it in from whoever is willing to give it to you. So having a appropriate protective boundary is important. And there are lots of things that a therapist can help you with if that's a big issue.
Yeah.
We all have a little bit of an issue with that. Our boundaries get crossed and we have to decide, should I make a big deal out of this or let it go?
Yeah, I had no idea what boundaries were.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy that I've been in these situations, even though they were terribly hurtful.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that I went through them because I got quite an education, and now I have really good boundaries and I'm able to actually be myself with everybody I come in contact with, because I wasn't for a while.
And that's the core of having healthy boundaries, is a really strong sense of who you are and an understanding that no matter what other people think of you or no matter how other people treat you, you have that sense of self. It's not going to be shaken by anyone. And in a perfect world, we'd all have that all the time, which none of us do.
Right.
But that's like the goal, right? Like, I know who I am. You can be nasty to me and it's not going to change my understanding of myself.
Yes.
And that is just a work in progress for all of us.
Yes.
And I think the more toxic relationships we run into, the more hopefully that we learn about how to hold that line between us and who we are and everyone else.
Yes. It can be challenging, but it can be done.
It can be. The other kind of boundary is a containment boundary, and that's the boundary that protects the world from you. So the boundary that keeps you from slamming into the car in front of you to make it move faster, or screaming at the top of your lungs that somebody like is moving too slow or whatever. Like, that is your self-control. And that's also an important boundary. And that's the boundary that people with personality disorders don't have. They don't have a containment boundary. It's all about them. They don't care about protecting the world from them. They will behave in different ways to get their way, but not because they value relationships or because they want to be a good person. It's because it serves them. We're tools to them.
You're right.
So no reason for a containment boundary.
Yeah.
And protective boundaries are relevant because they don't have a sense of identity to protect. So if someone is a continual boundary jumper, that is a relationship you really need to consider. Is this an important relationship that I want to keep? And am I willing to do the work to put into it? If it's a friendship, probably not. If it's your sister, maybe think about, how close you really want to be, and if you want to have a relationship and how hard you want to work at it. Boundary jumping is a huge problem. It is in general, I think, with regular people too. Like setting boundaries and holding them firm is a real challenge.
Sure is.
Yeah. Because, these behaviors, gaslighting and silent treatment, and regular people do them too. It's just there's not this intent of, there's not a long history and pattern of it, and there's not an intent to, it's all about me. It's more desperation or, dysfunction coming out in different ways. So it's not that everybody that does that has a personality disorder, but if there's a pattern of that and a lot of that, that's a huge red flag.
Yeah.
If somebody gaslights you, that's not something you do accidentally.
Right.
Yeah. And so if you want to continue a relationship with someone with borderline personality or a histrionic person, you have to understand that the boundaries, it's a process. You're not going to be able to just say, here's what's okay with me and here's what's not okay with me. Now let's just move on. You could do that with a regular person, but no, it's a process. It's baby steps of setting them and understanding that the person is going to try and jump over them, and then having strategies to push them back over, and knowing that it's going to be exhausting and being willing to put that work in. It's kind of funny. When we diagnose someone with borderline personality, they always seek therapy because they always are victimized and have all these problems. And we generally don't tell them they have borderline personality. It's really insulting.
You just write it in your little notes.
However, people that have been frequent visitors to inpatient, which often are borderline, they proudly display that diagnosis because it's all part of the pathology of getting attention. I have borderline personality disorder, so I have to go to the hospital a lot and you have to take really good care of me. And it's like, oh, geez. A lot of outpatient therapists won't work with them. I have had some people call and say, everybody else has rejected me. I have borderline personality. And it's like, well, I can why. I've always worked with them. I had a girl once tell me I was the only person that ever helped her and fire me in the same sentence. It was the most borderline thing anyone had ever done. You're the only person that ever helped me. Yeah, you're fired. Okay. And you're never sad to be fired by them. They're also the most likely to sue you if you're a healthcare provider.
Really?
Which is a lot of the reason why people don't really want to work with them. Because, well, first of all, there's a limited amount of help you can actually give them. They tend to be the ones that we say like 5% of the clients take up 95% of the time, and it tends to be them. Crisis all the time. They're in crisis all the time. And they get very angry if a therapist or a provider tells them something they don't want to hear. And then they punish, and often that's a lawsuit.
Oh,
it's fun.
That's scary.
Yeah, that's why a lot of people don't like to work with them.
Yeah, that's understandable.
So a lot of times there's a lot of self-harm behaviors where they're cutting, or a lot of eating disorders come out of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you go to an inpatient eating disorder clinic, you're going to find a large percentage of people there also are struggling with this. So it's managing managing its symptoms.
Right. It's not curing, it's managing.
Right. It's like
for the rest of their life, right? You can never, ever cure it.
So you tell them very clearly, here are my boundaries, and here's what's going to happen if you jump over it. But you know they're going to try to jump over it.
Right. And you follow through. You set the boundary. If you do this, I will do this. But if you don't follow through, then you're just threatening, and it's not really a boundary, right?
Just kind of like parenting.
Yeah.
And in a way, having a friend with borderline personality it's kind of like you're parenting them in a lot of ways, because they're looking for the caretaking and they're not giving anything back, like a child.
I never thought of that. Okay, so I was going to ask you, there's books that you wanted to recommend, and I'm going to include them in the show notes, but what are the books called?
One of them is this one, Children of the Self-Absorbed.
Children of the Self-Absorbed. Okay.
It says a grown-up's guide to getting over narcissistic parents. This is fabulous. It has lots of exercises. First of all, it will kind of help you look at what are the traits that the parent had and what type of narcissist were they. And then it tells you what the different responses to that would be for an adult. They divide them into compliant and rebellious. And it's interesting, if there are two children in the household, one usually, this is not research, this is anecdotal from what I've noticed, one tends to go compliant and one tends to go rebellious. And the compliant response is to do everything they say, grow up and be a complete rule follower, and want everybody to love you all the time and just be a people pleaser and be really nice and hurt a lot. Rebellious response is somebody that says, well, F you, I don't care what you think. I don't care what anybody thinks. And they tend to build up really thick walls. They just push people way back.
Yeah.
And neither of those are healthy at all. And what I like about this is it has a lot of exercises that you can do just personally to kind of explore where it shows up for you, and then ideas for how to think differently and kind of change your behavior so that you are healthier. So it's not really about the relationship with your parents. It's about your relationship with yourself.
Okay.
And feeling solid. So I like this one a lot. The best one for having a borderline in your life is called Walking on Eggshells. And there are two. There's I Hate You, Don't Leave Me, and Walking on Eggshells are written by the same person. Mason. And I Hate You, Don't Leave Me is more of a description of borderline and what they're like and how they got there and what causes it. And then Walking on Eggshells is kind of a user's manual, and it's got amazing techniques in there, like specific techniques. It's got a section on parents, children, siblings, friends, and intimate partners. So it really gives you solid advice, how to manage the relationship and when to walk away. Because that has to be an option it's for self-preservation. Sometimes walking away is what you have to do. And I think I put one in there about antisocial behavior as well, and narcissism. And those are both about recognizing that those behaviors in people. I think it's called The Sociopath Next Door.
Oh, yes. That is one. My husband read that one. It came as a recommendation. I'm like, really?
It's kind of fascinating because
it is fascinating.
Like, serial killers, Ted Bundy. It's like, well, yeah, that was one. Madoff also was a sociopath. I mean, there are a lot of people that if you look at how they've lived their lives, they just have no regard or remorse for anything that they've done, and they can justify anything. Ted Bundy's thing just happened to be killing, but that's not necessarily, I mean, that's definitely not the majority of it. It just normalizes. You can kind of recognize it in regular people.
Yeah.
And the book on narcissism, what narcissists don't want you to know is kind of how to recognize them on the sly, which I think is the most important part there, because you have to know what you're dealing with, and don't marry one ever.
Right. Does it say that in the book? Oh,
Maybe
that's just your recommendation.
marry a narcissist. If you're dating a dude who's mean to you or controlling, it is not going to get better ever.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to share with us today?
Just be careful. If you're in a relationship and it feels a little bit toxic, it is. And if somebody tells you who they are, believe them. A lot of times we like to think the best of people, especially people we're close to. But if someone says, I just don't want to commit. I don't want to commit. Just believe them. And when someone shows you who they are, believe them. We tend to make a lot of excuses for people before we walk away. And
that's good advice.
Most people stay way too long. And I have never had someone ever come back and say, I wish I stayed in that marriage longer. Or I wish I stayed with that abusive boss longer. Like, I really regret leaving that, because it happens in the workplace too.
Yeah.
It's a little less clear and it's not as personal, but it definitely happens in the workplace. Walk away.
Okay. Well, thank you, Stacy.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you for all the insight and helpful information. And it was so nice to see you.
It's always nice to see you.
Hopefully we'll go shopping soon for pants.
I'm there.
And I know you have to get to your pedicure now, so I will let you go. But thank you again so much. And let's do this again. I know there's more subjects we can tap into your brain about.
Anytime. I love it.
Well, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.